So last class we left off talking about an angiogram, and if you remember from last class, we talked about the idea that that angiogram was done in order to pinpoint where a blockage might be. And the reason that they do this is so that they can troubleshoot and determine where the blockage is in order to be able to either go in surgically and fix the blockage or um, get correct medication in order to clear the blockage. Now, a blockage could be caused by multiple things, one of them being arteriosclerosis, which we talked about last class, and you also did some research on that the other day. And arteriosclerosis is basically the narrowing of an artery, which then prevents blood flow from getting to or reduces blood flow getting to certain areas of the body. So an angiogram can also help pinpoint that as well. So moving on to our next concept, we're going to talk about how the heart is actually pumping. So the heart is referred to as a myogenic muscle. So this is simply talking about the idea that the heart is really controlling its own pace. So the heart muscle is very unique because it can contract and relax with it without external nerve stimulation. So what that actually means is our brain is really not in control of the heart rate. Yes, we do have hormones that are going to help increase and decrease heart rate, but the heart itself can pump on its own because of the different nodes that are located within the heart. So let's talk about how the heart is actually pumping. So the heart's tempo is set by the sinoatrial node, also known as the SA node. So this is our first important concept. This is a small mass of tissue that is located in the right atrium. Now, if you remember from our heart diagrams, the right atrium is located right here. Okay, so the right atrium, remember, is on the opposite side of the page because it's as if you are lying on the piece of paper or on the table. So your right side would technically be the highlighted side here where you see the right atrium, and the atrium is implying the top of the heart or where the heart is actually receiving blood. So the small mass of tissue is located in the right atrium, and you see it pinpointed right here. It was in blue before I highlighted it, and now it looks slightly green. And this is where your heart originates the impulse. And an impulse is really an electrical conductivity, and you'll talk more about that in Bio 30 when you talk about the nervous system. But this is going to stimulate the heartbeat, which is referred to as the pacemaker. I am sure you have heard of a pacemaker before in multiple videos or movies, and a pacemaker is just talking about regulating your heartbeat, which kind of makes sense because the sinoatrial node is acting as a pacemaker, regulating your heart or regulating your heartbeat. So the impulses that will then travel from the sinoatrial node towards the atrioventricular node. And you've kind of heard that term before, atrioventricular. Okay, we talked about it in terms of atrioventricular valve. So atrio is representing your atriums, which is located at the top of the heart. And ventricular is talking about your ventricles, which are located at the bottom of the heart. And again, the ventricles are the ones that are contracting to eject the blood to either the lungs or the body. Now, they call this the AV node or the atrioventricular node because it is located right here where you see I've just highlighted between the atriums and between the ventricles. It is basically located at the top of the septum. And as you see my pen here moving back and forth, this is representing my septum. So at the top of the septum between my atriums and my ventricles is representing my AV node. So what's going to happen is the sinoatrial node is going to stimulate an impulse, or basically send out an impulse. That impulse will travel down the muscle or the wall of the right atrium, as well as traveling towards the left atrium wall as well. So the fact that you have that impulse traveling this way, okay, you see that black arrow right below the SA node. This means that the impulse is going to cause contraction in your right atrium first. It takes a bit longer for the impulse to reach the left atrium, so your left atrium is going to contract slightly after your right atrium is contracting. Once that occurs, as the impulse is traveling down, it will hit the AV node. The AV node will then send the impulse down what we call the bundle of His. I wish it was called hers, but you know, bundle of His. Yes, I'm still going to make some jokes on videos. So the bundle of His is representing the nerves that are traveling down the right side of the septum and the left side of the septum. Okay, so the bundle of His is are these nerves that are allowing the impulse to travel quickly from the AV node down the septum, and then it will move up the sides or the walls of the left ventricle, as well as the walls of the right ventricle. So as it's traveling to the left and the right ventricle walls, we call these fibers that you see here in purple Purkinje fibers. Now the Purkinje fibers are where the nerve impulse basically ends, and once it reaches these Purkinje fibers, it causes the ventricles to contract. Okay, so they will contract with quite a force. And with that force, it's actually going to eject the blood out of the heart to its next step in the pathway, which we talked about the other day. So remember, the right ventricle is sending blood to the lungs, whereas the left ventricle is pumping the blood to the rest of the body. So basically out the aorta and then to the legs, to the arms, to the head, etc. You will notice that in most of our diagrams, we have the left ventricle being quite thick in comparison to the right ventricle. I hope I said left ventricle. So the left ventricle, you can see clearly here, is very thick. Now the reason it's so thick is you have to think about the location that chamber is pumping to. This left ventricle is pumping to the body, so you need a lot of force, you need a lot of pressure to actually push the blood out to and be able to send it to the rest of the body. Whereas the right right ventricle, a lot thinner of a wall. So this means it's not going to pump it very far, which makes sense because the lungs are located right next door. Okay, so heart in the middle of your chest and your lungs are right next to that on the left and the right sides. So in regards to the chamber, use the diagram to explain how the heart contracts. So what this means is, I want to make this small enough so that we have enough room to write. Impulse is generated at the ASA node. It will, I should put comma, it will travel down the right atrium. I'm going to put RA for right atrium. Now, technically, it's the wall of the right atrium towards the left atrium, LA left atrium. The impulse will hit the, sorry, let's go back actually, let's add one thing. As it travels, it causes the chambers to contract. More specifically, the atriums. The impulse will then reach the AV node, which quickly sends the impulse down the bundle of his, which if you notice it turns to the, oh sorry, it separates into the left and right sides. We call those technically the left and right bundle branches, okay, because bundle of his, left and right bundle of his is, but you can just call it bundle of his, that's fine with me. So it quickly sends the impulse down the bundle of his to the Purkinje fibers. Once it reaches the Purkinje fibers, the ventricle walls, and then in brackets I'm going to put left ventricle / right ventricle, will contract to eject blood out of the heart. Now, when you look at the right atriums are receiving the blood from the body, whether it be, or it's receiving from outside, so whether it be the body or the lungs. But when the atriums actually contract, they're actually contracting so that they can push the blood down into the ventricles. So the pressure of the heart's atriums contracting actually causes the atrioventricular valves to open up and allow the blood to actually pool into the ventricles. Now, valves are very important in the pathway or the circulatory system because they're preventing backflow. So we want to make sure that our valves are working properly because we want that one-way flow of blood. If you do not have a one-way flow of blood, that really causes a lot of issues. So I am going to show you this video about the heart contracts because it really helps seeing a visual rather than me trying to point to things and try to explain things. Sorry, bad connection. Sorry. I'm going to pause and open in Google.
The heart is the pump of the human.
Apparently Google does not work either. Hold on.
The left side of the heart has two.
Okay, rather than me waste valuable time, I am going to post this link on your guys's Google Classroom so that you can actually watch it. It is a very good video to help explain how the heart is pumping, and it shows the visual of the heart pumping as well. Maybe it's just this animation that's causing my internet some issues. We'll try the other ones as we go and see what happens. So, let's draw a pathway of the electrical impulse through the heart to help better explain how the heart is beating. So let's try this video and see what happens. Hopefully it will actually work. Going to open it directly in Google and see if that actually helps.
This animation explains how a cardiac cycle is produced by electrical impulses in the heart. The cardiac cycle starts when an electrical impulse or an action potential is generated at the sinoatrial junction.
So action potential is the terminology that they will use in Bio30, and that is just talking about an impulse or the electrical impulse being sent from that sinoatrial node down to the EV node.
The electrical impulse travels along specialized conducting fibers in the walls of the atria, stimulating the atria to contract and pump blood into the ventricles. In the normal heart, impulse travels very rapidly. As a result, all the muscle cells in the atria contract together, producing a coordinated pumping action. The impulse also travels across the right atrium through the atrioventricular node, vertically and slightly, to allow the ventricles to relax and fill with blood before they contract. The impulse travels along the bundle of His, where the conducting pathway is divided in two, forming the left and right bundle branches, which lie in the interventricular septum. From the bundle branches, the impulse spreads into the inner walls of the ventricles via specialized conducting fibers called Purkinje fibers. Finally, the impulse travels up the outer walls of the ventricles towards the atria. The man then controls the flow of the electrical impulse through the ventricles, stimulates the muscle cells in the ventricles to contract together and pump blood efficiently to the lungs and body.
So you can really see that in this video, the atriums are contracting first. The left does contract slightly less, but if you just say the atriums contract first, that is fine. Then it travels down the bundle of His, the left and right bundle branches, and then up the Purkinje fibers, causing a contraction of ventricles. That is a-okay with me. So atriums first, ventricles second. So you kind of have two contractions within the heart.
As you will see, during atrial fibrillation, the electrical activity of the atria becomes disorganized. As a result, the pumping function of the atria is lost, and the rhythm and efficiency of the entire heart are disturbed.
Perfect. I'm glad that video worked. I will still link this one in the post so that you guys can look at it after. I'm going to delete this one because I don't need that one. And so it will start. So muscles of the atriums are going to contract first. But if we're talking about the electrical impulse in itself, the electrical impulse starts at the SA node or originates at the SA node. It will travel towards the AV node, then down the right/left bundle branches, which are located in the septum. Then it will move through to the sides of the ventricles, which we call our Purkinje fibers. Okay. So, how fast the heart is beats is dependent on the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. You may have heard of these two terms before, and I kind of introduced it when we talked about the fight or flight response. Again, you will go into more detail about the nervous system in Bio30, but the sympathetic, that's a bad highlighter, so The sympathetic nervous system is referred to as an autonomic response. Now, again, an autonomic response is talking about an automatic response. So your body is naturally doing it. You don't have to decide to do it or think about it. It happens naturally. So in the sympathetic nervous system, it's preparing the body for stress, which means it is going to increase the heart rate. It is a little more complicated than that, but for Bio 20, that's all you really need to know. So if you are in a scenario in which you are, I don't know, nervous, upset, scared, all of these emotions do play a role in your sympathetic nervous system response or your autonomic nervous system response. And these can increase your heart rate. So if you're a sports player, you might have a little bit of nerves leading up to playing your game. Those nerves can cause your heart rate to increase slightly. So heart rate does increase, and it's preparing your body for a stress because, yeah, you might be nervous, you might want to walk away, but you're going to do it. It's not always about sports, so this can be the same concept as if you're getting on the stage to do a recital or playing a musical instrument, etc. All of these responses or all of these things can cause your sympathetic nervous system to increase your heart rate because your body's natural response is to make sure it's safe. Now, making sure it's safe is making sure that your body is getting enough oxygen so that it can do cellular respiration to create enough energy, ATP, in order to do whatever it needs to do to be safe. Now, if your body is in the sympathetic nervous system response where you do have an increased heart rate, your body always needs to maintain homeostasis. And we talked about homeostasis the other day as in balance within the body. So what goes up must come down. So you need to have something bringing the body back to normal or basically bringing your heart rate back down. So this is referred to as your parasympathetic nervous system. And again, you'll go into more detail about this in Bio 30. Really just know that sympathetic nervous system increases your heart rate, whereas parasympathetic is decreasing your heart rate. Now, what are the heart sounds that we actually hear? So when doctors are listening to your heart, they're actually listening for a lub-dub sound. Now, the lub-dub sound, we know, well, what the doctors are actually listening for is they're listening for the valves opening and closing. So if they don't hear a strong lub-dub, really what that is telling them that is that there might be something wrong with a valve. And if there is something wrong with a valve, that means that you may have backflow issues. So this means that some of your blood may be flowing backwards in the body or backwards in the heart, technically, because we're looking and talking about the heart. This means that your heart's going to be working a lot harder to push and pump the blood where it needs to go because it does have that backflow issue. So diastole and systole. Diastole is talking about when the heart is relaxed. I'm going to use a different highlighter for this one. Is when the heart is relaxed and the atria are filling with blood. So this is when your SA node is not sending an impulse because it's not always sending an impulse, right? The impulse is generated and then it passes by to the next node, which means that SA node is no longer active. So you have periods of active, inactive, active, inactive. So when it's inactive, and again, this is a very, very short period of time, but when it is inactive, basically that's saying that your heart is relaxing and it's filling with blood. So when filled, the SA node is going to send a signal to contract. So basically what this means is your SA node is going to get the signal that it needs to send another signal when the atria is completely full. Because it's not very efficient to contract the SA node or, cause an impulse when the atrium's half filled. So when it's completely full, the SA node does get that signal, and then it causes contraction. So the atria and ventricles. Atria is talking about multiple atriums, so left and right. The atria and ventricles are going to contract, increasing pressure within the heart, which then forces the AV and semilunar valves to open. This allows blood to move to the next stage. Okay, now I don't necessarily mean next stage, but next part of the pathway or part of the circulatory system. So the blood from the atria will then move into the ventricles, and then the ventricular blood will move to the body or to the lungs, depending on if you're looking at the right or left atrium. The process of contraction is known as systole. So typically doctors will summarize this in a very simple form of systole is when your heart's in contraction, diastole is when your heart's relaxing, okay, and filling with blood, okay, and systole is contraction when it's ejecting blood. So heart rate. So there is what we call systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. So systolic pressure, and I think I have this a little bit later on, but we might as well talk about here because we're talking about systole and diastole. So systolic pressure is really talking about the pressure in arteries when heart contracts to eject blood. Diastolic pressure is the pressure in, or technically, sorry, it's the residual pressure. Residual pressure in arteries when heart relaxing and filling with blood. So remember we talked about how arteries are sending blood away from the heart, and arteries get a lot of their pressure, they move blood based on the pressure from the heart. So when the heart actually contracts, it moves the blood into an artery, and if it's in the artery, then the artery is full of blood. So that puts pressure on the artery walls, and when it puts pressure on the artery walls, that's what the doctors read as systolic pressure. And we'll talk about this later as well. Diastolic pressure is when the heart is filling with blood, which then means there's less blood in the arteries because it's in the heart, or some of it is in the heart. It's not going to be completely empty, which is why we call it the residual pressure, the leftover pressure, because there's still some blood, just not as much. So that means that there's going to be less pressure in the arteries when the heart is actually filling with blood. Okay, so systolic pressure typically is a higher number, diastolic pressure is typically a lower number. So tachycardia and bradycardia. So tachycardia, you may hear some doctors call it tachy. So tachycardia is talking about when the heart rate is too high. So heart rate is basically number of beats per minute, really is what it's talking about. So there are always numbers when we look at heart rate. So anything, I should stay a smaller, anything greater than 100 beats per minute. So BPM stands for beats per minute. I don't want to move that. I want to move this. Or maybe not. So, oh, that's not being nice to me right now. So greater than, there we go, 100 beats per minute. And causes can be varied dependent on the scenario. So a cause to cause heart rate to increase could be things like scared. Okay, excited, nervous, and I'm not going to write all these down. So like typically emotions can cause your heart rate to increase. So it might be greater than 100 beats per minute. Is that okay for a short period of time? Yes. Long period of time? Probably not good. So what are some other external factors that may play a role in tachycardia? Okay, we do know that caffeine does play a role in heart rate. Okay, so excess caffeine is going to play a role in increasing heart rate. So drinking too much caffeine or maybe energy drinks could cause heart rate to be higher. Exercise also does it. Exercise. Having a bad day of spelling, apparently. Okay, and apparently I can't spell caffeine, even though I love caffeine. And then you may also have tachycardia with circulatory system disorders. Okay, and again, depending on the scenario. Okay, now moving on, bradycardia. So when we look at bradycardia, that is the exact opposite. So if tachycardia is greater than 100 beats per minute, we have something less than. Okay, so less than 60 beats per minute. Okay, so things that can cause bradycardia, there's a varied answers for this, but if you're physically fit, your heart rate's going to be generally lower. And when your heart rate is generally lower, you might think of it as a bad thing, but that could be a good thing. You could have a naturally low heart rate. When you're sleeping, your heart rate is lower naturally. Okay, so every scenario is different, but you can have issues within your body if your heart rate is too low for an extended period of time. Okay, so heart disease can be one big example as well. Okay, moving on. Heart murmurs. So heart murmurs, I've already talked about, I just didn't call them a heart murmur. So a heart murmur is talking about when the valves in the heart do not close completely. Now this you would have done research in last class. So they do not close completely, which means that you're going to have some backflow, or here I call it backwash. So this means that blood from your ventricles is going to go back into your atrium, which means your heart is not pumping efficiently. So this is going to cause an increased heart rate, which might go to the point where it's referred to as tachycardia, because your body still needs oxygen, still needs to send oxygen to the body. So your heart doesn't know any different. It just knows that all of the cells of your body need oxygen. So that being said, your body will naturally increase the heart rate in order to try to, and I'm using air quotes here, fix the fact that you do have some backwash. Okay, the blood going to your cells of your body is going to be less oxygenated if you do have this backwash than it normally is. So your heart has to work harder in order to get the same amount of oxygen in a healthy body as in the one that has that heart murmur. Okay, now an an EKG or an ECG. EKG, ECG is standing for an electrocardiogram. Okay, an electrocardiogram is basically a picture of heart rate, or sorry, heartbeat is the better answer. Okay, So where on this diagram, and this is going to be, or could be, a good question on a test, where is the P, Q, R, S, and T wave in this diagram? So I'm going to show you this video and then I'll show you this picture and then we're going to actually label this. So first our video, copy hyperlink, and then I'm going to go here. I don't want just V. Here. 349. Oh, oh my, it already tells us one of our answers. So we're going to put in our P wave as this little bump at the beginning. So this is when the atrias are contracting. So I'm going to put, make it smaller again. So this is representing my P wave. Oh, you know it goes there. I'll move them after. But this is our P wave, this small trunk here, which, if you can suspect, they all go in order. So your QRS is representing this big chunk right here, and then your T wave will be at the very end. But we'll finish the video first and then add it in.
Structure right here called the QRS complex.
So depolarization is just a fancy way of saying the heart sending the impulse and contracting. Okay, so I want you to put your QRS on your diagram. So Q is at the bottom here. So Q, and then R is up top here. R, and then S is down here. So he's going to talk about what the difference is there. But what I have here is Q is when the signal passes through the Purkinje fibers. He summarized this whole thing, the QRS complex, as the ventricles contracting, which kind of makes sense if you look at my summary down at the bottom here. Q is when the signal passes through the Purkinje fibers, which is on the ventricle walls. Okay, R is when the left ventricle contracts, so that's up here. And then S is when the right ventricle contracts. Okay, so this is the S. Now, R is going to be higher, or the left ventricle's a higher contraction, or showing a higher contraction, because again, it has more muscle. Okay, so it's going to be a stronger beat in comparison to the right ventricle.
During ventricular depolarization, the ventricles
Okay, repolarization again is a bio-30 term, and it's just basically when the uh, impulse is trying to go back to normal. Okay, so this is essentially for a bio-20 level when ventricles relax.
The ventricles are relaxing. Keep in mind that every depolarization is always followed by repolarization. Every contraction is followed by relaxation. That said, the question is, where is the beginning of depolarization? So if QRS represents ventricular depolarization or contraction, and T represents ventricular repolarization or relaxation, then where is atrial depolarization? This is depolarization. Well, that we have QRS complex. This is QRS complex is less functional because ventricles tend to contract stronger than atria, leading cells to pass through atrial depolarization. And so that is then atrial repolarization. And relaxation takes place after atrial. So then you have within QRS complex.
So basically what he's saying here is when the atrial or atrium contract, they still have to relax, but that relaxation is found with the QRS complex. So that would be the repolarization of the atrium as well as the ventricles contracting.
Now, as a review, TA stands for atrial depolarization.
Contraction,
QRS complex represents ventricular depolarization.
contraction,
TA represents ventricular repolarization.
relaxation,
Atrial depolarization is called relaxation.
relaxation.
Let's see it in examples. So let's start with some pictorial diagram. There are a bunch to learn about here. They're called QRS and QRS complex, as we said.
Okay, and then it goes way more detail than you guys need to know. So don't forget to put your T in this diagram as well. Okay, so P, atrium's contracting, QRS, ventricles contracting as well as the atrium relaxing, and then T is when you have relaxation of the ventricles. Okay, now these pictures of the EKGs here. You can see here that I have a fantastic diagram showing you a bunch of different heartbeats. So here you have your normal heartbeat. You notice how it's very neatly spaced between your QRS complexes. That is showing you that that is a normal heartbeat. A fast heartbeat being, for example, tachycardia, is when your QRS complex is squished together. Okay, a slow heartbeat when your QRS complex is further apart. And when you have closer together, further away, closer together, maybe further away, that is referred to as an irregular heartbeat. Okay, so doctors would really want to investigate that because that's really not normal. This might be because you just exercised, or again, it could be issues with the heart too. Maybe there is an issue with a valve, which they can actually pick up with an EKG as well. Now that's above my pay grade. Okay, moving on. So the last thing that we need to talk about today, and I realize that this video is very long, and hopefully you asked the sub to pause when you needed to, or you, if you're watching this later, pause so that you actually got down all of the notes. So medications in the heart. Digitalis. Digitalis is one of the examples of a medication that is being used to initiate a strong and irregular heart rate or heart contraction. So digitalis is used if you have congestive heart failure. So something's wrong with your heart. Maybe there's arteriosclerosis within your coronary arteries and veins, which are again on the surface of the heart. Fun fact though, digitalis is actually derived from a plant. So a lot of the medications that are used us as humans actually originated from plants, which we can thank a lot of our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, because really that's how all of the medications evolved to what we know today. Nitroglycerin is the next type of medication that is used in the case of the heart and the circulatory system, or the heart. This is actually preventing heart attacks. What it's doing is it's relaxing smooth muscle and dilating the blood vessels. Well, if you dilate your blood vessels, okay, and relax your smooth muscles, which are lining your artery walls, this means that your arteries are going to get bigger, which then means that the arteries that are on your heart are going to get more oxygen, which will then prevent a heart attack, because in a heart attack, your muscles of the heart aren't actually getting oxygen. So nitroglycerin is used to actually try to prevent heart attacks by allowing blood vessels to get as big as possible so that they can allow blood to flow through. So maybe there is a incomplete blockage where blood is getting through, it's just not going as fast as it needs to. So if you give nitroglycerin, then it has a higher chance of allowing the blood to go through, which then means you're getting oxygen. And then the last one is epinephrine. Epinephrine is used for multiple scenarios, but it's actually a stress hormone that our body is naturally producing, and it attaches to receptors on the heart and as well as blood vessels, and it causes increase in blood pressure and heartbeat. So this can be used for a variety of scenarios. So epinephrine you may have heard of before as in an EpiPen. So an EpiPen's job is to basically not necessarily just related to the circulatory system, but what else it does is it dilates your respiratory system, so your bronchioles, your bronchi, so that you can actually breathe, okay? Increasing blood pressure and heartbeat, you want your blood pressure and your heartbeat, or more specifically your heart, to contract so that it can get the oxygen to the body. Beta blockers will take up the epinephrine so that heart rate and blood pressure do not increase. So if you're in a scenario where you do have a high blood pressure or a high heart rate, doctors may be giving you beta blockers so that it can get rid of some of the epinephrine, which means that if there's less epinephrine in the body, your blood pressure and your blood pressure and your heart rate will actually go down instead of remaining high. Okay, that is it for today's lesson. So you'll see that there's a bunch of different assignments attached to this lesson, which are in your notes package. These are really good assignments to do as practice, so you can see there. Here's describe the function, so tell me what the job is. Okay, so it's not very directly related in your notes, although we've talked about it multiple times. And then here's a practice coronary pathway, fill in the blank. Again, good practice. I don't take everything in for marks, so it's important that you guys actually do some of these things that are in your notes for your own benefit. Okay, the lab we completed already, so you need to make sure that your lab is handed into the bin. Okay, I want the actual physical copy. It needs to be handed into the bin in the classroom. I need names of your group members on it. You rip it right out of your notes and staple it. And I will tomorrow talk about regulation of blood flow, which will hopefully be not as long. Till next time.